Hi, it's Mr. Preuss again, and I have another installment of our college planning video series. The topic for this video is college entrance testing, and there's so much packed into this topic that I've broken the video into two parts. So we're going to cover kind of an introduction and some key concepts first, and then drill down into your college entrance testing game plan in part two. So first of all, recognize that you have two choices when it comes to college entrance testing: the SAT and the ACT. These are tests produced by two different test companies. And I kind of compare the SAT and the ACT to Coke and Pepsi. They are similar products designed to provide a similar benefit to you, but they have different formulas. And for that reason, some people have a preference for one over the other. So you might be a Coke person or a Pepsi person. The more you get to know these college entrance tests, you'll probably develop a preference for either the SAT or the ACT. So it makes sense to get to know these tests so you can decide which one might work best for you. Both test agencies will provide you with a fee waiver for the testing fees if your family qualifies. Generally speaking, income would have to be in the range of the free and reduced lunch income guidelines put out by the federal government. There are other reasons you can qualify for a fee waiver, but that's a good reference point from an income standpoint. Both test agencies also allow you to make use of testing accommodations that you might have through a 504 plan or an IEP. Both test agencies require that you get those testing accommodations approved in advance. So if you normally take tests with accommodations, extended time, a reader, something like that, you need to speak with me as your counselor so that we can put the proper application in to try to get you your testing accommodations on your college entrance tests. A key concept to keep in mind, this is something I believe very strongly. Test scores are a tool. Okay, you're going to use these test scores to accomplish certain purposes. That's the only reason I can come up with why millions of teenagers would pay money out of their pocket to take a 3.5-hour test on a Saturday morning. Okay, it's got to serve some purpose for you. So see these tests as a tool you're going to use to create opportunity for yourself in the admissions process. And just like any tool, you want to make sure you know how to use it before you pick it up. That's why we'll talk a little bit about test prep in just a minute. Before we do that, though, I want to just provide some context for you to understand the current college entrance testing landscape. So I have some slides here that I shared with you briefly during our PSAT score workshops, but I want to walk through them kind of quickly here. This year with coronavirus, we've seen the testing industry kind of turned on its head in a lot of ways. The current senior class had a difficult time getting test scores. Test center cancellations were rampant and created a lot of stress. Created a lot of stress for colleges as well because they required test scores and students weren't able to get them. So the majority of colleges changed their testing policies for the current senior class. The policies vary by college, but by and large, colleges have all gone test optional, which means they will still accept scores, but they don't require them any longer. Okay. And that's kind of a mixed bag for you as you're trying to decide whether you want to send your scores or not. We'll talk about that a little bit. But at this point, understand that most colleges have moved to a test optional approach for the class of 2021, and future policies at this point are beginning to emerge. Some colleges, actually, if I can advance my slide here, some colleges have already stated that they are suspending SAT and ACT scores as a requirement for just the current application cycle, so class of 2021. Other schools instituted a trial period, and they said, well, for the next 2 or 3 application cycles, we're going to be test optional. And so that would include you as a class of 2022 applicant. And other colleges have announced that they're using this opportunity to shift entirely to a permanent test optional policy, which is something that many, many hundreds of colleges have already done in earlier years. So it really is a changing landscape. It's hard to know exactly which schools are going to require what from you as far as your testing goes. And as I said, many colleges are beginning to define their testing policies for your graduating class as we pass through the mid-year point here and head into the late winter and spring. So my approach and my suggestion is that you go ahead and acquire some test scores. It's the number 2 goal that I've shared with you for the end of your junior year, that you have some college entrance test scores that you feel good about, that you feel represent your abilities. So I think it makes sense for you to have them. And then the other suggestion is that you keep tabs on the testing requirements for the colleges that seem to be rising to the top of your list as you're conducting your research. And undoubtedly, those policies from schools will continue to roll out. And so it's important that you keep tabs on them. So that's a little bit of the testing landscape. I listed test optional versus test blind on my outline because there are some nuances here. People who aren't strong test takers or weren't too excited about having to take college entrance tests might feel overjoyed that colleges now aren't requiring them. But keep in mind, the fact they don't require them doesn't mean that they wouldn't use them. And a good example of that I just learned about in the last week or so was Amherst College. And you know, there are many colleges that probably I could share similar stories about, but I happen to know about Amherst's situation because they shared it out after their early decision process was complete. So Amherst College is a selective, very selective college. Over 60% of their applicants who were admitted early decision sent in test scores, even though Amherst is test optional. And so what that means to me is, and the colleges will let you know this up front, if you send scores, they will use them in their evaluation of you. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, the college is test optional. Great, let's forget about it. We don't need to send scores. If you have scores that are good for the schools you're looking at, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, it could be in your best interest to send your scores to those colleges. Colleges have a lot of priorities, not just admitting you or admitting us, creating opportunity for students. Colleges are also concerned about their reputation and their standing and their status. And so colleges would love to see students submitting test scores that are very strong because they can incorporate that into their data and their numbers, which can help with their rankings and so forth. So test optional does not mean testing isn't important. Test blind, that's a different policy altogether. And there are colleges that have declared they are test blind, which means they won't accept scores, they won't use them in the process. They've made a decision to sidestep the issue of college entrance testing altogether. So in cases of test blind schools, there is no advantage to sending scores. My next point is that test prep can make a difference. And this is thrown in there to encourage you to take your test prep seriously. There was a day when the test agencies kind of tried to deny that you could prep for the test. They wanted the world to believe that their test was a nice objective measure of something innate in a student or something that couldn't be influenced within a student. And that's no longer the message that the test agencies are sending. In fact, if you took the PSAT, when you got your PSAT score report back, there was a little message on there from the College Board saying, students who scored like you scored, who invested 10 or more hours in online prep work, raised their SAT scores by a certain number of points, maybe 100, 110 points. So the test agencies themselves now are making it very clear that prepping for the test can make a difference. It can raise your scores. Both test agencies have rolled out free test prep resources on their websites. And so conclude very clearly that the time you invest prepping for these tests can make a difference. And we'll talk about test prep resources in the next part of the next video. So my last point on my outline here is, what is a good score? And this tends to be a question, whether it's spoken out or just in the mind of the students that come to the PSAT workshops. I think is a pretty prominent question, and it's a good one. Obviously, the higher the numbers you post, the better your score is. But a good score is a little bit of a subjective question. And my answer to this question is, a good score is a score that allows you to accomplish your admissions goals. And so this wraps in very closely with the research you'll be doing, with your goals and aspirations for what your college list is going to look like. But keep in mind, there are colleges out there that don't require SAT or ACT scores. So it's irrelevant to them. On the other side of the spectrum are highly selective colleges that have hundreds of students for every spot they have to give away in their freshman class. And so in the case of those colleges, having scores approaching the perfect scores would certainly be an advantage. And I have some examples here I just want to share with you real quickly, just to give you a sense of how a good score could vary from one college to the next. This is a slide of the SUNY systems summary of their admissions, the admissions information for their four-year campuses. And this is just a part of the list. So what you see in the blue box is the middle 50% range of SAT scores for all these different SUNY campuses. And you see that they vary by campus. So the strongest numbers we see on there would be Cornell's College of Human Ecology. 1445 to 1540 captures the middle 50% range of admitted students who provided SAT scores. Compare that to what you see with the New York State Ceramics at Alfred University. 1,000 to 1160 is their mid-range for SATs. So if you were to take a look at test scores you achieved, let's just say you got a 1200 combined. You might look and say, hey, for Alfred University's ceramics school, my 1200 is a pretty good score. It's up in the upper 25%. However, if you compare it to the College of Human Ecology, you might not be able to define a 1200 as a good score for that college within Cornell's University. So it's a good example of how a good score is contextual. And I mention this because you don't have to stress about posting a perfect score. You can shoot for a score and prep for a score that's more moderate and still have it accomplish your admissions goals. This next slide is just a quick snapshot of the university colleges. So some of the four-year campuses within the SUNY system, you see different mid-ranges for different schools. And then the third slide, this is a quick snapshot of the middle 50% range for the SUNY's colleges of technology. So slightly lower than what we saw with the university colleges. So again, it's important to realize that what a good score is for you based on the list you're developing might be different than what a good score is for a friend of yours or a classmate of yours who has an entirely different list that they're looking at. So that's a little bit of an orientation to college entrance testing. The next video, part 2, is going to dig down a little bit deeper into how you should develop your college entrance testing game plan.